Well, in our previous class, we were discussing the concept of sacrifice, and I had read out from the mother's works about the explanation of the sacrifice of the Divine Mother, and in that context, we were also discussing about the Vedic concept of sacrifice as against Sri Aurobindo's concept of surrender. And I remember having made an observation that the mother personally does not prefer the word sacrifice. She would prefer the word surrender. And fortunately, I found in the last week Mother's own original explanation of these two words, surrender and sacrifice. This is from the Mother's Collected Works, Volume 3, page 114. And this is a conversation from 1929, 4th August 1929. This is the question: is not surrender the same as sacrifice? Mother's answer: in our yoga, there is no room for sacrifice. But everything depends on the meaning you put on the word. In its pure sense, it means a consecrated giving, a making sacred to the divine. But in the significance that it now bears, sacrifice is something that works for destruction. It carries about it an atmosphere of negation. This kind of sacrifice is not fulfillment, is a deprivation, a self-immolation. It is your possibilities that you sacrifice, the possibilities and realizations of your personality, from the most material to the highest spiritual range. Sacrifice diminishes your being. If physically you sacrifice your life, your body, you give up all your possibilities on the material plane. You have done with the achievements of your earthly existence. In the same way, you can morally sacrifice your life. You give up the amplitude and free fulfillment of your inner existence. There is always in this idea of self-immolation a sense of forcing, a constriction, an imposed self-denial. This is an ideal that does not give room for the soul's deeper and larger spontaneities. Well, I'm particularly reading this out in full because this is not the meaning that we have in the Vedas. It's a completely different notion. But as you can see, she is describing sacrifice as it has come to be known now, but not in its original sense. And what it was in the original sense, we'll come back to it when I read the Purusha Sukta from the Vedas. So, but Mother is describing what it has come to be now, and therefore she says, by surrender, we mean not this, but a spontaneous self-giving, a giving of all yourself to the Divine, to a greater consciousness of which you are a part. Surrender will not diminish, but increase. It will not lessen or weaken or destroy your personality. It will fortify and aggrandize it. Surrender means a free, total giving with all the delight of the giving. There is no sense of sacrifice in it. If you have the slightest feeling that you are making a sacrifice, then it is no longer surrender. For it means that you reserve yourself, or that you are trying to give with grudging or with pain and effort, and have not the joy of the gift. Perhaps not even the feeling that you are giving. When you do anything with a sense of a compression of your being, be sure that you are doing it in the wrong way. True surrender enlarges you. This is really the meaning of yajna. The Vedic yajna is exactly this. Enlarges you. That's why we have so much of yajna in the Vedas, where there are so many ceremonies and yajnas, and all the symbols in the yajna are supposed to enlarge you, to increase you, to enrich you. So that was the original symbol, and that has come to be exactly what Mother is explaining as surrender now. True surrender enlarges you. It increases your capacity. It gives you a greater measure in quality and in quantity, which you could not have had by yourself. This new greater measure of quality and quantity is different from anything you could attain before. You enter into another world, into a wideness which you could not have entered if you did not surrender. It is as when a drop of water falls into the sea. If it still kept there its separate identity, it would remain a little drop of water and nothing more. A little drop crushed by all the immensity around, because it has not surrendered. But surrendering, it unites with the sea and participates in the nature and power and vastness of the whole sea. There is no ambiguity or vagueness in the movement. It is clear and strong and definite. If a small human mind stands in front of the universal mind and clings to its separateness, it will remain what it is, a small bounded thing, incapable of knowing the nature of the higher reality or even of coming in contact with it. The two continue to stand apart and are, qualitatively as well as quantitatively, quite different from each other. But if the little human mind surrenders, it will be merged in the divine universal mind. It will be one in quality and quantity with it, losing nothing but its own limitations and deformations. It will receive from its vastness and luminous clearness. The small existence will change its nature. It will put on the nature of the greater truth to which it surrenders. But if it resists and fights, if it revolts against the universal mind, then a conflict and pressure are inevitable, in which what is weak and small cannot fail to be drawn into that power and immensity. If it does not surrender, its only other possible fate is absorption and extinction. A human being who comes into contact with the divine mind and surrenders will find that his own mind begins at once to be purified of its obscurities and to share in the power and the knowledge of the divine universal mind. If he stands in front but separated without any contact, he will remain what he is, a little drop of water in the measureless vastness. If he revolts, he will lose his mind. its powers will diminish and disappear. And what is true of the mind is true of all the other parts of the nature. It is as when you fight against one who is too strong for you, a broken head is all you gain. How can you fight something that is 1,000,000 times stronger? Each time you revolt, you get a knock, and each blow takes away a portion of your strength, as when one who engages in a pugilistic encounter with a far superior rival receives blow after blow, and each blow makes him weaker and weaker till he is knocked out. There is no necessity of a willed intervention. The action is automatic. Nothing else can happen if you dash yourself in revolt against the immensity. As long as you remain in your corner and follow the course of the ordinary life, you are not touched or hurt. But once you come in contact with the divine, there are only two ways open to you. You surrender and merge in it, and your surrender enlarges and glorifies you, or you revolt and all your possibilities are destroyed and your powers ebb away and are drawn from you into that which you oppose. There are many wrong ideas current about surrender. Most people seem to look upon surrender as an abdication of the personality, but that's a grievous error. For the individual is meant to manifest one aspect of the divine consciousness, and the expression of its characteristic nature is what creates his personality. Then, by taking the right attitude towards the divine, this personality is purified of all the influences of the lower nature, which diminish and distort it, and it becomes more strongly personal, more itself, more complete. The truth and power of the personality come out with a more resplendent distinctness. Its character is more precisely marked than it could possibly be when mixed with all the obscurity and ignorance, all the dirt and alloy of the lower nature. It undergoes a heightening and glorification, an aggrandizement of capacity, a realization of the maximum of its possibilities. But to have this sublimating change, he must first give up all that. By distorting, limiting and obscuring the true nature, fetters and debases and disfigures the true personality. He must throw from him whatever belongs to the ignorant lower movements of the ordinary man and his blind, limping, ordinary life. And first of all, he must give up his desires. For desire is the most obscure and the most obscuring movement of the lower nature. Desires are motions of weakness and ignorance, and they keep you chained to your weakness and to your ignorance. Men have the impression that their desires are born within. They feel as if they come out of themselves or arise within themselves, but it's a false impression. Desires are waves of the vast sea of the obscure lower nature, and they pass from one person to another. Men do not generate a desire in themselves, but are invaded by these waves. Whoever is open and without defense is caught in them and tossed about. Desire, by engrossing and possessing him, makes him incapable of any discrimination and gives him the impression that it is part of his nature to manifest it. In reality, it has nothing to do with his true nature. It is the same with all the lower impulses, jealousy or envy, hatred or violence. These too are movements that seize you, waves that overwhelm and invade. They deform. They do not belong to the true character or the true nature. They are no intrinsic or inseparable part of yourself, but come out of the sea of surrounding obscurity in which move the forces of the lower nature. These desires, these passions have no personality. There is nothing in them or their action that is peculiar to you. They manifest in the same way in everyone. The obscure movements of the mind too, the doubts and errors and difficulties that cloud the personality and diminish its expansion and fulfillment, come from the same source. They are passing waves, and they catch anyone who is ready to be caught and utilized as their blind instrument. And yet each goes on believing that these movements are part of himself and a precious product of his own free personality. Even we find people clinging to them and their disabilities as the very sign or essence of what they call their freedom. Well, that was, I think, one of the deepest and the most beautiful explanation of surrender. And as you can see, why she prefers the word surrender to sacrifice. She has explained it clearly. And what I would like to add is the idea that whatever she has explained about surrender, of course it is not given in such details on psychological level, but basically it's the same notion that we have in the Vedas. When they say yajna, it's exactly the same thing that is there, the individual connecting himself to the gods, and the gods in response giving themselves to man. So there is a live reciprocation between man and God through the ceremony, through the possibility of yajna. So yajna is not just a ceremony done with some paraphernalia, but it is a constant movement that takes place in man, and there's a constant correspondence between man and God. Well, afterwards what she explains, you see, this is a very beautiful sentence. I'll read out because I'll take something from yajna and similar meaning. You surrender and merge in it, and your surrender enlarges and glorifies you. Or you revolt and all your possibilities are destroyed and your powers ebb away and are drawn from you into that which you oppose. And I suppose you have also noted that this is a process, the process of surrender is to be done by those who turn to yoga and sadhana. She does not expect this process to be taken up by those who are in the ordinary consciousness. But at the same time, as Vedas would tell us, this yajna is taking place in nature in quite an automatic manner. So we may be aware or not, but a constant exchange is taking place between the entire nature and the divine and the gods, as they would call. And here I'll read out a paragraph which gives quite the essential meaning of sacrifice or yajna. This I don't think you will have here. I don't know if Savitri Bhavan would have this book called the Vedic Epiphany, Volume 1, by my father, V. Madhusudan Reddy. There is a trilogy here, the 3 volumes on the Vedas, written by my father. So the first one is called the Vedic Vision. So I found a very interesting paragraph giving us the essence of yajna or sacrifice. And you see how close it comes to what the mother has explained about surrender. This is on page 76 of this volume 1. Sacrifice, yajna, is the quintessence of the Vedic revelation. It epitomizes all that the Veda envisions. It's a decisive action, an intentional process which effectuates the spiritual transformation of the earth nature. It communicates the evolutionary intent of the conscious creature to its creator and participates and manifests the truth will of the Lord in the heart of creation. Sacrifice is the warp and woof of creation, says the Rig Veda. It is a universal fabric extending everywhere. Sacrifice is an act in perpetual process that is the basis of the universe. It is sacrifice again that holds the universe together and keeps it in existence. It is a fourfold sacrifice that the Vedas disclose. Sacrifice performed by the seekers of immortality to ascend into a higher world, the world of authentic existence, Paramavyoman, the world of perfect freedom. Sacrifice performed by the gods themselves in response to the call of the earth, and the sacrifices made laterally both on earth and in heaven by men and gods respectively for their resplendent replenishment and existence. The universe itself owes its origin to a divine sacrifice and is sustained by the divine's constant sacrifice. Gods are the primal or the first agents of sacrifice. Man is central to the God, to the creation, and the gods exist for him as he is the cosmic focus of all divine activity. Through sacrifice, the gods sacrificed the sacrifice, says the Atharva Veda. Well, this is not the context to explain, but only I want you to be aware that this notion of sacrifice has been there as the primordial concept in the Vedas, because Sri Aurobindo refers to that when he talks about the sacrifice of the Purusha in this paragraph that we are dealing with. So actually the sacrifice of the Purusha refers to one of the verses in the Vedas, and it's called the Purusha Sukta. It is the verse, the prayer of the creation of the universe. So I'm taking this from the same book by my father, that is the Vedic Vision, on page 174 onwards. But you ought to know this, because this is precisely the reference that we have in this book, The Mother. And I think as we are going through the details of every phrase referred to, it's but natural that you should know this. I'll read out this sukta, but before that there's a little introduction. The hymn, Purusha Sukta, is approached by some as a ritual worship, a hymn of daily japa, and by others used as a means of expiation, prayaschitta. As stated in the Rig Veda, it consists of 16 verses, its authorship being ascribed to Rishi Narayana. It is also found in the Samaveda, Aranya Samhita, the Atharva Veda, the Taittiriya Aranyaka of the Krishna Yajurveda, and more elaborately in the Shukla Yajurveda. Well, of course, these are few details most of us may not understand, but I don't have time to explain. But this is only the source to tell you that this is the hymn of creation, as it is said, the first hymn of creation that is given in the Rig Veda. And what is important, as you will see after I read that, it involved the entire process of involution as well as evolution. So this is again very interesting to see the similarity between Sri Aurobindo and the Vedas in this question of involution and evolution. So it's very interesting and surprising that we have the same notion in the Vedas. The Purusha Sukta describes in a figurative way the cosmic and evolutionary import of the Supreme Being's sacrifice. If you remember the word sacrifice when we read from the Mother, that how the divine came down and became or really entered into each particle of atom. So that is how he spread himself into matter. So that is what the Mother explained as the sacrifice of the divine when he came down from his transcendental level to split and spread himself in every atom of matter. And it's the same concept here. It speaks of the restoration of the divinity of creation by the supreme holocaust of the divine. It is this sacrifice that distributes the divinity among the gods, the prajas, and the whole of the universe, enabling them to move jointly and integrally towards immortality. The Purusha Sukta is one of the most important and oft-quoted Vedic hymn. It is a hymn to the Supreme Purusha and a declaration of the basic principles underlying the process of creation. It is the hymn of the evolutionary creation sacrifice, which the Absolute and the Transcendent, His integral powers, the supramental Godheads, and the yet unmanifest universe are involved. It is a description of the primal or first sacrifice performed by the gods with the cosmic person for the sacrificial offering. Creation is the result of this inconceivable holocaust, the precipitous, infinite self-limitation of the Purusha. The world of infinite variation is the result of the supreme self-sacrifice, the yoga of self-involution, chit tapas. Well, all of you have known this concept of the involution, and we have also had some occasion to explain that. But here there is a wonderful word which can really explain this whole process of involution, and that word is infinite self-limitation. So that is the whole process, that the divine is undergoing an infinite self-limitation until he becomes a particle in atom. So that is what is called the process of self-sacrifice. And so then in the Purusha Sukta, the first few verses explain this, and then later there is a process of evolution.